mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 2 of HBO's House of the Dragon, entitled The Rogue Prince. I think the title's pretty obvious here. We're talking about the Rogue Prince being Daemon, who is very much doing everything in his power to provoke Viserys into some sort of action. But I want to talk about Daemon a little bit later. I kind of want to just open really by, well, first shouting out my patrons, Delvin Cox and Factual. Obviously, I only got the two, but it just started. If you want to learn about the details of the Patreon, you can find them in the video titled Major Announcement, which was posted about a week and a half ago. You can find that there to get all those details. But talking about the episode, I thought the episode was strong in a very traditional Game of Thrones sense. You know, where you get a lot of conversation, but you get a lot of plot machinations and things that are happening between the lines and things that are setting up future conflicts that could go really awry. And I think our experience with Game of Thrones is going to help kind of color how we interpret the actions of the characters on the show. Because we're going to know now, we already have that knowledge of like, okay, if this happens to this person, this is likely how this person's going to respond. Like there's us already having this knowledge and this foundation of what this world is like saves a whole lot of trouble here. And that kind of makes me want to get into a first point that I want to talk about real quick, in that I've noticed that the show is doing time jumps pretty heavy. We opened this episode 6 months from the end of the previous one, and if you watch the next week on, it jumps forward even more to when the baby is already born and looks to be like a toddler. The baby that is going to, I'm assuming, will be the son of Viserys and Allison. So we could be jumping next week ahead a couple years. And I'm wondering if this is the show kind of acknowledging, like, hey, we saw your criticisms and we're going to make those changes to make those things flow a little better. Because one of the biggest criticisms of Game of Thrones was they'd set up something like, hey, this is what needs to happen. I think the best example is Arya going to Braavos. The Arya and Braavos storyline, I think, went on way longer than people anticipated. Like if you think of like when she first leaves Jaqen to go to Braavos to when we get to the Braavos thing paying off, which is her killing Walder Frey. Like we're talking gotta be like 3 seasons or something like that. Like it's a long time. And I think, you know, people talked about how the show would kind of like drag out these things where it's like, okay, we think this is gonna happen. Like even if you look at season 1, I feel like, you know, when we all first watched season 1, I think Daenerys and her crew and her dragons arriving in Westeros, I think we thought that was going to happen sooner than season 8 or whatever it actually happens. And now it seems like the show is, this show, House of the Dragon, is saying, okay, we're going to set this thing up, but we're going to pay it off quickly. And if that involves a 6-month time jump, so be it. You know, I like how they paid off the idea of, they set up in this episode, like I said, Daemon very much trying to provoke Viserys. They set that up, and Game of Thrones would have set up a Viserys-Daemon confrontation and paid it off 3 seasons later. Whereas this they kind of get the ball rolling on that in this same episode. So like I like the fact that they're doing these time jumps, and that also made me wonder if. Do you guys think that maybe these first few episodes are kind of like a prequel / flashback to the main story? And what I mean by that is, think of like Game of Thrones season 6. It opened with the first flashback, which was a flashback to Cersei as a kid and the witch and the gold be their shrouds, all that whole thing, right? And all that what that did was it served to provide us a little bit of context as to why Cersei behaves the way she did as it pertained to her kids. I'm wondering if rather than having a flashback sequence or even a flashback several sequences, that if this show is taking several episodes to give us backstory, and the House of the Dragon show is really going to be based around the fallout of what we're seeing right now involving Viserys, Rhaenyra, Daemon, all of that stuff. Like something significant is going to happen at the end of this portion. We'll just say 3 episodes for the sake of argument. 3 episodes, and then say we'll jump forward into, well, we've already seen that we jump to where Allison and Rhaenyra are adults. We already know we end up at that point in this season. It makes me wonder if, like, say after 3 episodes, something's gonna happen, and then the show's gonna jump forward 20 years, and then now the whole rest of the show is gonna be playing out based on the events of what happened in those first 3 episodes. We're getting it spread out over 3 episodes as opposed to, you know, a couple of scenes or one scene. Think kind of like how the Game of Thrones show, a lot of that kind of plays out from the fact, kind of from Jaime pushing Bran out of the window in episode 1. You know, like that never happens. A whole lot of this other stuff doesn't happen. So like, I'm wondering if that's the case. And if it is, that kind of intrigues me. Like, I like the idea of getting 3 episodes of backstory as opposed to a flashback sequence or like a title card where it's like in whatever 172 years before Daenerys, there was this beef between you know, running off the names, Viserys, Corlys, Daemon, and the crab feeder, and all, and you know, like a thing where they just put it in like 2 paragraphs, like, hey, this is what happened, and then they jump into the storyline. I like the idea of getting several episodes of what would be a title card on another show, and just seeing that play out. But again, that might not be what's happening. That I could be wrong, obviously, but I'm wondering if that's the case, and if so, I find that to be pretty interesting. So, I wanted to talk about first starting off with the opening credits. I didn't have any problem with the same theme song being used. As a matter of fact, I guess I put on Facebook, my soul left my body where the actual Game of Thrones theme dropped. I did not expect that. And then we got the new visuals to go along with it, and I thought they looked really cool. I've heard you know, some consternation about trying to figure out what exactly it is we're seeing in those moments. And I think I would just challenge people to think about how you interpreted the Game of Thrones opening credits in season 1, episode 1 of that show. Did you look at that and go, I know exactly what this is? Of course you didn't. It took time for you to understand the show, and then you can look back and be like, oh, okay, now we're hitting these different locations, and I can see the cities forming. By then you know, like, okay, I know what King's Landing looks like. I know what the wall looks like. Like, all of those things make sense after you've seen a fairly significant portion of the show. So I wonder, like, for those of you who might be frustrated with not really having a good grip on the visuals during the opening credits, I would remind you to just maybe give it some time, and then maybe things will play out on the show that will make the credits make more sense. Just from a strictly like visceral level, just looking at it and feeling, I thought it looked really cool. I thought it felt very dramatic. All of the blood is super cool. Couple that with the OG theme, and I enjoyed the opening credits quite a bit. So, yeah, kind of surprised that there were people who didn't really like that. But, all right, so I talked about the time jumps and how I feel like the show learned a lesson from that rather than dragging it out. But like I said, that could be combined with the idea that they're just doing several episodes of flashback, essentially. But I want to talk a little bit more about Daemon. And, you know, I said that he was trying to provoke Viserys. And I'm wondering if, like I mentioned, we'll see, say, hypothetically at the end of 3 episodes, something will happen, and then we'll jump ahead, say, 20 years, and we'll be dealing with the fallout from that. This show does tend to have a way of, like, having something that seems not insignificant, but an event take place, and then the fallout from that event is 10 times more than what anyone would have expected given what that event is. And I'm wondering if Daemon's actions are going to have unintended consequences, because let's start with how he's provoking Viserys. You know, he's taking over Dragonstone. He steals this egg. I feel like there was a third thing that he did that was solely meant to draw a reaction out of Viserys. And he does. We get that really cool bridge scene where Hightower shows up there, and you think shit's about to pop off. Rhaenyra comes through on, what's her dragon's name? Syrax? Something with an S. Syraxes? No, I think Syraxes is Daemon's dragon. So maybe it was Syrax. But whatever, she shows up on her dragon. You think the shit's about to pop off. It looks like, okay, this is going down. And I think Daemon was really just trying to provoke action from Hightower that would then justify him being able to use his dragon to eliminate them. And I think Rhaenyra coming through and talking to somebody, and like I mentioned last week, they clearly have a relationship that I'm pretty sure is probably going to go from bordering inappropriate to fully inappropriate, given how Targaryens get down. But she does show up and uses that connection with Daemon to kind of like talk the situation down and get the egg back. But that very much looked like it was something that was going to go in a very different direction. And now we have Corlys coming to Daemon for help. So I want to talk a little bit about Corlys and what he's been dealing with, Corlys Velaryon, and how I think, again, talking about the idea of certain actions and what they're planning or what they're going to do will not be a small action. But I'm just saying that whatever the fallout from this, I think, is going to end up being something way more than what anyone anticipates. But, Corlys has been being spurned by Hightower and I think the small council in general throughout these first 2 episodes. And we had the whole thing of him bringing the thing about the Triarchy and the Crab Feeder. And I wondered in the first episode, because it was almost it was almost mentioned like an offhand comment. And then he's dismissed by Hightower. Hightower's very dismissive of the way Corlys wants to handle the Triarchy and the Crab Feeder. And then we don't really hear of it anymore. And I wondered, I'm like, is this going to be a bigger deal, or is it something that was just kind of like just to show us that Hightower and Corlys just have some sort of thing going on? But no, it does end up being more. We see the Crab Feeder causing all sorts of havoc. You guys saw it. I don't need to describe it. And Corlys is like, okay, now we're in a situation where we have to take some sort of action. The Crab Feeder and his pirates have taken over the Stepstones, right? Yeah, I believe it's called the Stepstones. And initially, Viserys was cool with that because he's like, okay, the pirates taking over that area, that's the Triarchy's problem. Like, the pirates can handle that whole situation. But now, Corlys is like, okay, they've taken out my ships, they've taken out my people, now they've taken out a Kingsguard member. Like, we can't just stand idly by and allow this to happen. And Viserys is very much like, oh, I don't want war with the free cities. I'm not trying to start no shit, basically is what he says. And at the end of the episode, after Corlys is again spurned by Viserys with the marriage proposal thing, which I'll talk about a little bit later, we then see him now, I guess, with his back to the wall, like, okay, I'm going to have to go to Daemon, someone else who clearly is also spurned by Viserys and who also is going to have some resentment, but also has the means to carry out the actions that I want to carry out, and maybe I can work out a deal with this guy and we can both self-serve. So I feel like whatever their plan is and whatever ends up happening is going to have much worse consequences than they intend. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at here. So that's kind of where I land on that, and I'm excited to see how that plays out. So talking about Corlys again, Corlys decides to make a power move, and I love in this episode how everyone presents the idea of Viserys remarrying and having another kid as what he's supposed to do to carry on his lineage, and it's the proper thing to do as a king. You just can't be single. And the unspoken aspect of all that, which I think is the true motivation across the board, is to not have Rhaenyra be heir. And Corlys makes this move himself. He doesn't want that as well. And he offers up his own daughter as a potential wife for Viserys. And everyone that he talks to makes it sound like this is a pretty good idea. This makes the most sense. Corlys sold me on it. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. He should probably do that. Then you see the kid, and it looks like she's like 8. They say she's 12, but she looks like she's 8. It's just not a good look. But after Viserys decides to essentially turn down that proposal in favor of marrying Allison, now we look at it like, okay, Corlys he brings the idea of how to handle the Crab Feeder, like, we can't take this, we have to do something, to Viserys. Viserys turns him down, Hightower dismisses him, and now he comes with what is a very sound, logical, and sensible marriage proposal, and Viserys turns that down just because Allison makes his dick harder than the 8-year-old does. But Allison's only a child as well, so it's like, it's very much several slaps in the face to Corlys, which then sends him toward Daemon, and I think all that's going to spiral out of control. But I want to talk about Viserys and Allison for a little bit because, I mentioned that, he chose her because she makes his dick harder than the 8-year-old does, which I'm sure is very true. But I like the fact that Alicent is very much knowledgeable of what she's doing. And this is another thing that the show, I think, is playing it a little bit light. Like, you might look at that and be like, okay, why would Rhaenyra have a problem with Alicent? Because she didn't choose this. And no, she didn't choose this. She didn't go and propose marriage or even suggest it or imply it. But she's very much understanding of what Hightower is doing, what her father is doing, Otto, and what impact that's going to have. So I don't see why anyone would have any problem with Rhaenyra being mad about this, because she sat here and she's bearing her soul. They're rubbing their hands together. They're praying in this beautiful scene in front of these candles, all the while with Alicent knowing that her father's intent is for her to suck up to Viserys and to move in on that spot herself. So she knows the plan for her family is to move in on Rhaenyra's father, and she's sitting there praying with her, rubbing her fingers on her palm, on her hand, and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's a very devious way of behaving, but I like the fact that the show isn't very blatant with that. You got to kind of read in between the lines. I think it's very clear that Alicent is very much maybe not wanting to do this, but aware that this is the goal. And I think that's pretty interesting. We see that in the preview for next week that it seems like Alicent and Viserys are going to have a boy. So now that puts you in a position of how do we handle this now? How does Rhaenyra handle this? And then also, if we do this time jump up several years, does that happen at the end of the episode? Or are we just going to find out after the fact the fallout or what happened with Corlys and Daemon and the crab feeder? So I kind of feel like maybe that's going to play out the first half of the episode. Maybe we jump forward again and we see Alicent and Viserys having this kid, and now this kid's like, say, a year, 2 years old, something like that. And then we'll kind of get out of that. We'll kind of deal with that fallout, and then maybe we'll have another episode, and then we'll jump forward to where they're adults. I don't know, but I really like the direction I think this show is going, because I think it is going to turn into something way more than it feels like right now. And admittedly, it does feel kind of small. I feel like the majority of these 2 episodes have been spent in the small council chambers. So it's like, can we get out of the small council chambers? Can we get out of the Red Keep? Can we get out of King's Landing? Like, we're spending like all of our time in these places. We see Dragonstone in this episode, but that's kind of in sharp contrast with how Game of Thrones started, because we started off in Winterfell and we immediately saw King's Landing. We saw what else do we see? Do we see Flea Bottom? I think we see Flea Bottom. We see all these different kind of places very early on, and I think we kind of started to see the scope. And then the show expands, and we go to Dorne, and we see all these different places. We go to Essos. We started off in Essos with Daenerys. So like, I feel like this show does need to expand a little bit and get us out of the small council chamber and maybe into some other places. Like, I want to see Winterfell. I want to see Harrenhal. I want to see all these places that they keep mentioning a little bit more often. And I think that's why another reason why I kind of feel like these first few episodes might be a prequel, because once it kind of expands out, then we're probably going to see that fallout, and we're going to see maybe where various people end up. And then also, there has to be some sort of fallout for both the Hightower family and the Valerian family, because neither appear in Game of Thrones, but both feel like they're very, very high up in Westeros overall. Like, they're both very, very important families within Westeros. And Game of Thrones told us about the Starks. They told us about the Lannisters. We ain't hear nothing about no Hightower or no Valerian. At least I mean, if we did, it was in a very like a throwaway line, but none of these characters appeared. And now in this show, only 172 years prior, these seem like prominent houses. Whereas conversely, I haven't heard the name Lannister yet. So what happens that seemingly either completely wipes out the Hightower and Valerian names, or relegates them to a level of insignificance to where they're not even players once we reach the Game of Thrones timeline. So lots of interesting things that I think this show has set up so far that I think are going to pay off. I also want to talk about Rhaenyra slightly. I like the idea. I don't like the idea, but I like how they did it on the show. of her still being the cupbearer despite being named heir. Because when they open up this episode, well, they open it up with the crab feeder stuff, but we move into the small council chamber where we spend the vast majority of these first 2 hours. And Rhaenyra's filling up the cups. They're having this conversation about the crab feeder again, and she wants to suggest dragon riders. And when she suggests it, they all look at her like she's crazy. And Hightower even says, like, yeah, you better stick to pouring cups or something like that. And I'm sitting here like, she's the heir. Like, not only should it be okay for her to speak, she should be speaking. She should be fully aware of everything that's going on. Like, she should be on the small council. But when we talk about how they look at women within this world and that great conversation that she has with Rhaenys in the episode as well, that felt very much like a Cersei and Marjorie kind of conversation. But, you know, when we hear that conversation and Rhaenys gets to say the whole line about they'd rather torch the realm than see a woman sit on the Iron Throne, that scene earlier with her still being cupbearer and still being treated like cupbearer, even though she's an heir, even though she's the heir to the Iron Throne, almost shows that even Viserys didn't quite take it seriously. Like, oh, I'm going to name her heir. And she says it. She's like, he only did it to spurn Daemon. Like, he doesn't really want me in that role. And I think that proves it. Like, he did it just to fuck with Daemon, because even though she's heir, she's still being treated like a cupbearer as it pertains to information that she should be hearing if she is to be taking over as king. So it shows that, like, no one ever really even plans for her to become king, and they still plan on finding a male heir to take over that spot. And I love how, like I said, I don't love that concept, but I love how that concept was presented to us, again, with that kind of read between the lines a little bit. Like, obviously, they're, you know, on the surface, they're going to have them talk to Rhaenyra a certain kind of way that lets you know that they don't respect her. But again, just the idea of looking at that, like, the heir should be hearing this, the heir should be on the small council, the heir should be able to give feedback, and they're treating her as if she's not the heir, then making that connection, like, they probably don't ever intend for her to actually take this role in the first place, and she's right about this solely being a move to fuck with Daemon and not something that's being shown or being offered to her out of respect. So I want to wrap up with a couple of quick thoughts, and then, I don't know, I feel like there's so much to dig into in each of these episodes, and I feel like looking at my notes, I'm like, what am I forgetting to talk about? But, I did kind of want to talk about the triarchy and all that kind of stuff a little bit more, but I think I've talked about it enough. But if you have questions about that whole aspect of the story, because real quick, actually, before I do get into my thoughts, I like how there's going to be multiple, I guess, ways of perceiving what needs to be done here. Because if you look at it if you're Daemon and Corlys and you decide that you're going to attack the crab feeder, this is going to be in direct violation of Viserys' wishes. This could start war, will likely start war with the Free Cities. And then you look at it from the flip side of, okay, what if you don't do anything? Because they laid out that long list of all the reasons why the people why people have reason to believe that the crown is vulnerable. And so if you don't do anything, that's just another reason on the pile on how the crown is vulnerable, and people will look at it like, okay, we can fuck with these people. Like, they're out making a girl the heir. They're letting people take over Corlys's ships and his people and killing Kingsguards, and they're not doing shit. Like, you have to do something. So I like how both options are pretty shitty, but the option that involves Daemon and Corlys also puts them in direct adversity with Viserys. So I thought that was pretty cool. So a couple of thoughts before I wrap up. It's 11:54. I need to wrap up in 6 minutes. I mentioned the thing about the first few episodes being kind of like a prequel. I also mentioned, I mentioned this too, the idea that we haven't seen a lot of places, but a lot of places have been mentioned. I like to see those. My last thing is a question. We see in this episode and in the first episode, the way Viserys is reacting to these cuts that he's getting from the chair. And I want to pose the question, because like they pose the idea, I think, of there being insufficient means to treat this ailment. And I kind of feel like, I'm like, okay, so you get a cut and you could die? Like, that seems a little bit far-fetched. I mean, they've already referenced things that we know, like Milk of the Poppy and things like that we know have healings. They're still going to have maesters. Like, you mean to tell me they can't heal that? And they seem to be confused about what it is anyway? Do you think there's a possibility that the throne itself has been poisoned? And the reason I think that is because this feels similar to the thing with the sand snakes and how the one sand snake put the poison on her spear. So when she cut Bronn, it poisoned him, and the whole thing of like, okay, if he gets sexually excited, it's gonna accelerate the poison, and that whole thing, right? Could that be something like? Could they have put something like a earlier version that's not as deadly on the chair, knowing already that the chair has a history of cutting the people who sit in it? Could that be a thing to kind of like give him like a slow death, but the death that is inevitable and that's coming? Because it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, because that also fits in with how they did Jon Arryn in the original show. So you can kind of like draw those parallels. So wondering about that. I guess we'll see soon. I'm going to wrap this one on up, and I will see you guys next week for episode 3. Let me know what you think in the comments. We can chat it up. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Answer any questions I might have had. I'll answer any questions you guys might have, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 3. Peace.